good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I appreciate it's a big ask for people to come to give up some part of their evening at the moment to join us for any kind of training, but we do appreciate your attendance. I'm Louise Gatley, I'm the Chief Officer of Bolton LPC, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague Alison Scowcroft, who is here in her role as a pharmacist for Midlands and Lancs CSU, and they've been commissioned to provide support for the rollout across the whole of the country, and Alison supporting us here in Greater Manchester. We've also got colleagues Charlotte and Paula from the Christie and from the Cure team, and we're all going to be a part of tonight's presentation. Can I have the next slide, please, Alison? Thank you. Okay, so GM Healthcare Academy, we are a partnership between the NHS and community pharmacy, and we have some support from our key education and training providers as well. And our main aim is to support community pharmacy to deliver their full potential in services. And we run a number of training events throughout the year for community pharmacy teams, most of which are free to attend. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this is who we are. So our founding members were the Greater Manchester, it was the Health and Social Care Partnership, but now Integrated Care, our pharmacy LPN, both of the LPCs in Greater Manchester, so GMLPC and Bolton, and our provider company CHL. And we do have some support as well from CPPE. Next slide. Thanks. So a little bit of housekeeping for Zoom. So please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. That'll just avoid any interference with the presentation. If you've got any questions for us, or if you're struggling to hear or there's any problems, please do use the chat and one of us will pick up the comments. You can put questions in there too, and we'll answer either as we go along or possibly at the end in the Q&A session. We are recording tonight's session, and that just enables us to host the video on our YouTube channel later, where we'll have a series of these videos in the different trusts across Greater Manchester that you can log in and watch. Next slide, please. So onto the agenda. So we'll start with the service overview from Alison, and we'll have a little bit of an update from the Christie, from our team there, around what the Christie is going to do and what it looks like for them in the hospital. And we'll finish up with me covering service delivery and farm outcomes. So moving on now to Alison to take over the next section.
Thanks very much, Lou. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background to the NHS smoking cessation service, coming from the long-term plan and the Ottawa model of smoking cessation. I'll talk to you a little bit about the pilots that we had that took place in the last year or so, and an update on the national implementation of the smoking cessation service. So in terms of the background, I'm sure everybody on the call is familiar with the NHS long-term plan. Prevention is a core component of the long-term plan, and this sets out the NHS's contribution to tackling tobacco dependence. So there's some requirements that by the end of 23-24, all people who are admitted to hospital who smoke will be offered NHS-funded tobacco treatment services, and that includes acute maternity and mental health trusts. So this commitment is designed to be the NHS's contribution to helping to deliver a smoke-free generation, and it builds on the good work that's already being delivered and is intended to complement current stop smoking services. There's a focus on both physical and mental health services, and it introduces a level of national direction, but with local development and delivery. So we know that smoking cessation programmes already exist in the community, but they are variable in terms of their involvement of pharmacy. So our colleagues in the hospitals across Greater Manchester have adopted the Ottawa model of smoking cessation, and that is a 12-week programme, and it requires follow-up smoking cessation treatment after a patient's been discharged from hospital. And the evidence shows that adopting the Ottawa model leads to an increase in one-year quit rates by 11%, and it's expected to save the NHS £85 million within the year. So the aim of the NHS smoking cessation service is to support delivery of the prevention ambitions in the NHS long-term plan, and for community pharmacy to become a nationally available choice for patients to access smoking cessation support post-discharge. So we had a couple of pilots that took place in 2020 and 2021. We were very lucky to have one of those pilots here in Greater Manchester in the Oldham area, with the Royal Oldham Hospital Cure team referring patients to 12 pharmacies across Oldham. Those pharmacies were selected following an expression of interest process to make sure that we had good geographical coverage across the borough with extended opening hours. There was then a second pilot area that went live a little bit later on in November 2021, and that was in the Lambeth and Southwark boroughs of London, working with Guy's and St Thomas Hospital and King's College Hospital. All these pilot sites have now transitioned into the Nationally Commissioned Smoking Cessation Service. Just to give you some numbers from the pilot in Oldham, in just over a year, there were just over 200 patients referred to community pharmacy. And of those, 81 patients enrolled with the Stop Smoking service with that pharmacy. So that's a sign-up rate or a conversion rate of around about 40%, which is in line with what was expected given referrals into other services. We then had a 4-week quit rate of 57%, so 46 of those 81 patients recorded a successful 4-week quit. Again, that 57% quit rate is in line with other smoking cessation services. And 19 of those patients went on to record a quit at 12 weeks as well. What we quite often saw was that patients did drop out of the service after the 4-week quit because they felt that they had completed their quit journey and didn't need any further support. That's the reason really for the lower 12-week quit rate. But the statistics that you can see on the screen were in line with other smoking cessation services offered by locally commissioned community services. So really pleased with the results in the pilot. So NHS England then transitioned the pilot into the Nationally Commissioned Smoking Cessation Service. So they worked with the National Centre for Smoking Cessation and Training, the NCSCT, to develop a standard treatment programme that's specific to the SCS service. PSNC and NHS England agreed the service funding for the service. So the consultation fees for the SCS are funded through the Community Pharmacy Contractual Framework, the CPCF, and any NRT that's supplied as part of the service will be recharged back to the ICB. They also agreed the service specification, and then the service was launched to align with National No Smoking Day back in March 2022 last year. And it was launched as an intentional soft launch because clearly the status and the stage of each hospital trust across the country in implementing their cure team or their tobacco dependence team is very different. So it was recognised that the SCS referral pathway would only be able to be implemented with those trusts who already had their cure teams in place. So we're very lucky here in GM that we have made good progress to our NHS long-term plan ambitions and have cure teams in place within all the trusts across Greater Manchester. In terms of the national implementation of the SCS, as Lou mentioned earlier, the Midlands and Lancashire CSU has been commissioned by NHS England to support the rollout of SCS across England. So the role of the CSU, initially around scoping and mapping and understanding the position of each trust, as I mentioned before, in terms of their delivery of the relevant parts of the long-term plan in implementing their tobacco dependence teams, and then identifying key stakeholders within each trust to support setting up working groups. We then facilitate implementation at a local level, and there's a pharmacist advisor available for each region. We've supported with ensuring that those pilot sites transition successfully, and we're working closely with the trust sites who have their cure teams in place and are ready to start delivery of setting up the SCS referral pathway. We have a 3-stage process to go live. So the first stage is scoping and mapping, engaging and establishing those working groups with key stakeholders within the trust, including public health and the LPC and any other local tobacco commissioners. Once we've got the right people around the table, we then look at agreeing the pathway. So what is the method of sending that digital referral from the cure team out to the community pharmacy? And in Greater Manchester, it's been agreed that farm outcomes will be used across the whole of GM to send that electronic referral. Then we move into stage 3, which is agreeing a go live date and engaging with the community pharmacies in the area, working with the LPCs to make sure that we've got a good coverage across the geography in terms of community pharmacy sign-ups. And that's one of the reasons why we're here this evening talking to you about the service. So the pathway is very simple. There's a patient who's been admitted to hospital. They are supported in their journey, their quit attempt by Charlotte and Paula and their team within the hospital trust. And then at the point of discharge, if the patient wishes to continue with their quit attempt after they've been discharged, then they can be referred to either the locally commissioned service or to a community pharmacy through the SCS referral. Or it may be indeed that a patient decides that they don't want a transfer of care, that they're going to continue their quit attempt on their own. The model of care you should be familiar with, so this is in your service specification, which you can download from the PSNC website. So the red boxes at the top is where the patient is supported by the cure team within the trust, and they have treatment initiated. The blue boxes in the middle represent that transfer of care. So the patient designates a pharmacy to receive that electronic referral and continue their treatment upon discharge. That referral is then sent electronically, and the pharmacy make contact with the patient within 5 working days of receipt of that referral. And then the green boxes at the bottom represent that patient transitioning fully into the community pharmacy service. So having registered with the pharmacy and having their follow-up appointments. And then the final step is the post-event messaging, which is sent back to the trust and to the GP practice. So just wanted to pull out a few parts of the service that are particularly important for pharmacies to pay attention to and take notice of. So the NHS SCS is intended to complement existing locally commissioned stop smoking services. So if your pharmacy is delivering a service which has been commissioned by your local council, then you can run these 2 services alongside each other. You can only see patients in the SCS who've been referred from the acute trust, whereas in your locally commissioned service, you may be able to recruit those patients yourself. So the 2 services will kind of run alongside each other. For the SCS, you must contact the patient within 5 days of receiving that referral, and you must make at least 3 attempts to contact that patient. That's really important because they will be given a supply of NRT when they're discharged from hospital, and you need to make sure that they don't run out of that NRT in the period after they've been discharged. So really vital that you contact them promptly after receiving that referral. You can provide support for up to 12 weeks, and that's 12 weeks from the quit date. The consultations which you deliver with your patients should be delivered no more than 2 weeks at a time, and you can do them face-to-face or you can do them remotely, either on the telephone or online video consultation as appropriate. And your NRT must be supplied a maximum 2 weeks at a time. There is an agreed list of products in the drug tariff, so make sure that you're making supplies of products that are in that list in the drug tariff. You need to make a clinical record of all service activity. So for GM, the suggestion is that you use Farm Outcomes because the referrals are also being sent through Farm Outcomes. So that would be the easiest platform for you to use. If you're delivering your patient consultations face-to-face, then you should use a carbon monoxide monitor to reinforce that consultation with the patient. There are no charges to patients, even if they pay for their prescriptions. So that's really important. The patient level outcome data must be returned back to the trust and to the patient's GP. So from a trust perspective, the trusts all have access to Farm Outcomes themselves because they're making referrals, so they will access the data directly from Farm Outcomes. But for the patient's GP notification, there is a manual notification that's generated, which you will need to send. In terms of the fees, pharmacies who've registered with the BSA to provide the service will receive a fee of £1,000. That's to cover the training that's involved with delivering this service with the NCSCT, and also the carbon monoxide monitor, which you need to buy to support the service. You'll then get £30 for the initial consultation, £10 for any interim consultations, and the last consultation is £40. And that last consultation can be at any time from the week 4 to the week 12 point. The claims should be submitted on the MYS portal. In terms of training, if you've already signed up with the BSA, then you should have completed this training already and be ready to go. So you do have to complete your NCSCT Stop Smoking Practitioner certification. If you've already done that as part of the requirements for a locally commissioned service, then you don't need to redo it, but you do need to have your Stop Smoking Practitioner certification in place. There's also some additional NCS CTE learning modules that you need to complete around supporting people with a mental health condition, pregnant women, and also e-cigarettes. You must also have read the NCSCT Standard Treatment Programme, which you'll use to support consultations, and you need a carbon monoxide monitor and a standard operating procedure in place. In terms of where we're up to in Greater Manchester, I think Lou has got a more detailed slide than this one for you, but we've had really great engagement across GM. Majority of the trusts are live or planning to go live shortly. Charlotte and Paul are hoping to start making referrals in the next week or so after today's session. And then we've just got Salford Royal and Tameside due to go live in February. Other than that, the rest of the trusts are either live or in progress. And in terms of pharmacies, a bit meaningless probably this slide, but there are lots of pharmacies signed up to deliver the service across Greater Manchester. We had just over 300 the last time we looked, which is good. So you can see there's good geographical coverage there across GM. And sign up is open. So if you are attending the webinar this evening and you haven't already signed up, you can still sign up with the service through the NYS portal. There's some resources there for you on the last slide of mine. Do visit the PSNC website. There's lots of information on that page about how to set up and deliver the service. There's a link there to the service specification and also to the dashboard, which is where that map of the pharmacies who were signed up came from, and a link to the NCSCT Standard Treatment Programme, which is a really valuable document that you'll use to support your consultations with patients. So I'm going to hand over now to Charlotte and Paula, and you guys, if you can talk to us a little bit about what you do in the trust and any useful tips, information, anything that you think the pharmacies on the call would find helpful in terms of supporting the particular type of patients that you have at the Christie.
Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction, Alison, and thanks for inviting us this evening. So my name's Charlotte Fincher, and I've been at the Trust for quite a long time now. I started here when I was 17. I'm now 50 now, so that's quite a long time. And I work closely with Paula. We've had this smoking cessation service probably about 18 years now in the Trust. And basically it's as though the patients tell you how they're getting on and how they feel and what nicotine replacement helps them. For example, when Alison picked up before regarding doing some training about e-cigarettes and things like that, we do have a lot of homeless people as well, where they've got no fixed aboard. So there's quite a good thing on the NSCTT regarding training on homeless people as well, because sometimes patients don't actually, the sofa surfing we also have patients that are undergoing head and neck treatment. So potentially, if you were to talk to them basically about using nicotine replacement, one of the, what we find with the head and neck patients, they can't have actually anything in the mouth. So it's almost, well, I'll hand it over to Paula, like an acidic effect, isn't it, Paula?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realise that cigarette smoke is very acidic.
Yeah.
And so we work alongside people telling them about that, because the treatments that they're going to have here at the Christie are often going to make that a lot worse, and so that anything's going past is actually a problem. We do therefore use a lot of patches, because they're obviously away from the area of treatment, and things like the gum is not something that we've ever used here. We had a long discussion right at the beginning of this time, simply because we were finding gum, ordinary gum, all over the place. And of course now with COVID coming in and various flu and all the rest of it, what we don't want is people just chewing it in their mouths and then leaving it in all sorts of places for other people to get rid of, especially in M&S and where they're sticking it on plates and things like this. So we don't do that. But the other thing is sometimes with the other lozenges, for instance, it's too harsh for people in their mouths to have it, suck it, park it. it's very hard for them to do that. And also because the mouth is the whole area that we're looking at. And usually mouth throat is very common for us. And the whole area, as I say, is going to get very sensitive during treatment. And having a concentrated substance against that treated area is not a wise idea. So it's not something that we do for them. So mostly our work is about patches.
But I'd just say as well, for head and neck patients, some of them actually, they have a voice box fitted, you know, so basically they might not be able to talk to you. So Alison picked up before regarding what's appropriate to send. So sometimes they can't talk on the phone, so using things like messages on the phone and things like that. We just take for granted every day normal eating and things like that ourselves, or, you know, cleaning our teeth. Some of these patients really struggle with that area in the mouth. It becomes really sore, and often sometimes it can bleed a little bit as well. And also if they are having something like maybe chewing gum or something and they're nil by mouth and they swallow it, they're at risk of any, you know, aspiration things. So it's almost just checking in with them what treatment they're having, because one size doesn't fit all. We also have some patients that you might come across that almost when they come into the Christie, they may find it almost becomes like the white coat sort of patient doing to rather than
working
with. So it's they're going to listen to you to say to them basically maybe having a carbon monoxide machine, and they might not be able to blow on the machine because they might be undergoing lung treatment. So they might be having radiotherapy on the lung. So they actually can't blow into the carbon monoxide machine. But because you're talking to them potentially about getting a quit date or, you know, whatever they need at the time or whatever you need, but it's basically finding out, can they actually blow into that machine? Is it, you know, because sometimes they just do what you say. So it's sort of having that open conversation, that open dialogue. What treatment are you undergoing at the moment, and working with them, because again, one size might not fit all. So it's just really finding out about the person and what kind of treatment, because
we use it in the past.
Pardon?
I was just saying we used the carbon monoxide machines in the past and actually stopped using them because people were getting very frustrated. It was underlining what they couldn't do rather than what they can achieve because of their illness. And it was too hard for them, in honesty. And we didn't think that that would be a problem, but it was for most people who were our particular cohort of patients.
And also, I don't know if you probably come across it yourselves, that we might have patients that don't speak English, so we might have to get translators involved to check how they're getting along, really, because sometimes we just presume, you know, they can speak English. So it's good to recognise that not everybody has that as the first language. So it's finding out again about that, because sometimes you might ring them or phone them and they might not understand what you're saying, and people that potentially we find what our head and neck patients, sometimes they can get really frustrated because they can't speak. So it's almost like they think you're not listening to them. So some people might prefer to write it down rather than talking about it. So it's really finding out about that person and what's happening. Yourselves will know a lot about this for nicotine replacement. They might also be on potentially steroids, they might already have a lot of sickness as well with the treatment. So it's just really and also they might be a diabetic as well, so it's just checking on the sugar levels with the GP, which I know you'll all know about that anyway. But it's just almost we do these things naturally. We brush our teeth, I said earlier on, we eat, and sometimes you can just take that for granted. So it's just having an awareness that these type of patients that might come from the Christie may be different to people that just come in from the street or other hospitals locally, because potentially they're also dealing with a cancer diagnosis as well as trying to stop smoking. So it's almost trying to do do it all in, you know, under one roof. But just, I don't know, I think it's also planning and having a commitment, you know, and just checking in with them, how's it going and things like that. And Alison mentioned earlier, really good point, that free phone calls, but a lot of our patients might not be answering the phone because they're being seen again at the Christie. They might be here for an operation, they might be in for so many weeks, they might be having chemotherapy, so, and they might be having radiotherapy, and that's daily, and then sometimes it can be for 6 weeks when they're having head and neck treatment. So it's almost when you first have that conversation with them, or, you know, it's finding out what's happening with them. Where will you be? You know, is there any way I can support you? What's best to support you? And just finding out, really. And that's, I think that's what's made our model grow, isn't it? It's just working alongside, not doing to. It's just tell me what's happening at the moment. What can I do to support you best? So I think that's basically it. I don't know if there's anything else. If anybody's got any, I don't know if you, I'll hand over to Alison or Louise and just take it from there. Sorry, I don't know if that was helpful today.
That was really helpful. It was really helpful to me as a pharmacist listening to you, because I think you've given us quite a lot of things, I think, to think about that maybe we don't think about. I think we've all got our, you know, we deal with our routine patients with NRT, and you know, certainly things around the CO monitor, not being able to use that potentially, certainly around like the mouth problems and why we might not want to use any oral therapies, are things probably we don't always consider. So I think it's been really, really helpful. If you're able to stay for the rest of the presentation within a Q&A at the end, that'd be great. My session now is quite short, so I'm sure that we'll probably have some questions for you at the end, and some things we can pick up. But yeah, no, I find that really quite interesting. It's not things that we've dealt with before, I suppose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alison, can I have the next slide, please? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so just talk a little bit now about GM deployment in a little bit more detail. So as Alison mentioned, we've got farm outcomes across the whole of GM, which is brilliant. Certainly going to make things a bit easy for us with all our referrals coming to a place that we're used to looking for other stuff. All of our trusts have been engaged with, and they've all got active cure teams in place, and they're all keen to go ahead. And we are rolling out as fast as we can, as fast as the trust will allow as well. So like Alison mentioned before, Royal Oldham were part of the pilot site and did a great job, obviously, because we managed to get a national service out of this. Bolton were the next trust to go live at late October last year, and we've had Wigan, some of the MFT sites, Stockport live, and then obviously next to go will be the Christie. Next slide, please, Alison. Brilliant, thank you. So this slide here just shows the rest of the trusts in Greater Manchester. You can see there we've got the Christie there highlighted as our next site. We've also got Salford Royal and Tameside there with some provisional dates in, and the rest of the trusts have all been engaged with, and hopefully we will be getting those on the path to go live soon. We will share these slides with you at the end, so you can have a look, and any that you think may impact on you, you'll be able to get the dates and details for. Next slide, please. This slide here, we are going to share with you, so don't try and read it all now. It is quite detailed, but this shows in a bit more detail the patient and data flow. So in the middle there, you've got the community pharmacy element. So you can see you've got the referrals coming in from the blue at the top from the hospitals, and the data flow back in there that Alison mentioned before, and also the data flow at the end of the pathway back into the GP practice. But like I say, don't try and read that now. We will share that with you at the end, and you can have a look at it at your leisure. Next slide, please. Okay, so farm outcomes. It'll always start with an electronic referral from the hospital to the community pharmacy. So in a similar way to the DMS service now, or from GPs referring for CPCS, etc. So you'll have your referral drop into your services tab on farm outcomes. And at the hospital end, the cure teams are going to be using farm outcomes there, and they'll upload all the information that you require. So the patient demographics, their information, contact details, their quick date, and any details of any NRT that have already been supplied to that patient. So you'll have everything that you need there in farm outcomes to help support that patient on discharge. The hospital will discharge to the patient's preferred pharmacy. Because, as Alison points out, we've got about 300 pharmacies live with the service. Patients may not always go to the pharmacy that they use, but they'll go to one that they've chosen in their locality. Once you've accessed that first module and completed that first part, there's then a series of modules for you to complete as the patient progresses through their quit. And the claim functionality on NYS is now active, and I'll talk about that in a slide or two. Next slide, please. Thank you. So within Pharma Outcomes, like I mentioned, you've got your initial module that'll come attached to the discharge from the hospital. That's a bit that you'll complete first. And following that one, you've got a series of different modules depending on where the patient is within their quit that you'll need to complete. So you've got the initial intervention template, you've got the interim appointment templates, the 4 and 12-week quit templates, a template that allows you to refer onwards to another community pharmacy if you're unable to provide the service for whatever reason. And finally, there's also a manual entry module. Now, we're not expecting you to use the manual entry module in GM because we've obviously got all our trusts going live using Pharma Outcomes. However, there is the odd occasion where you may receive a referral from out of area from a trust that's not using Pharma Outcomes, or potentially if there's been an outage in Pharma Outcomes, we do occasionally see a default to NHS Mail. So if you do see that there, you've got those modules there for manual entry that you can use. One thing just to point out here is it's really, really important that if you also provide locally commissioned services, that you choose the correct templates to complete your services on. So the national service is really clear, and hopefully within the services set up by your local authorities, that's really clear as to which they are. So please try not to mix those two up, because it does take a little bit of unpicking if we have different services registered on the wrong templates. Next slide, please, Alison. Okay, so accepting a referral in Pharma Outcomes, this does look a little bit different to what you used to, for example, with CPCS. You've got two options, and you've got complete now or reject. You haven't got an accept option that you will have seen before in some of the other services. So what we want you to do is, when you receive a referral, is to contact the patient and confirm that you've received the referral, and click complete now to acknowledge that you've received it. This initial conversation with the patient doesn't need to be the initial consultation. It just needs to be an acknowledgement, and at that point you can make arrangements with the patient for when that first appointment will be, and that obviously needs to be before the patient runs out of any NRT. So within 5 days, contact the patient and arrange that appointment. Doesn't need to be done by the pharmacist. It can be done by any member of the pharmacy team, so you can get one of your staff to keep an eye on those referrals coming in, and make that initial contact and make those appointments for you. Next slide, please, Alison. So Pharma Outcomes at the moment, we're not paying for it as community pharmacy, but we do know that Pharma Outcomes are intending to go down the provider pays route, like they have done with the 111 referrals from CPCS. So at the moment, we have full integration into NYS. The data is transferring for you at the end of each month, but you will at some point, and we don't know when that point will be, you will at some point be given an option to either remain with the integrated solution via the provider pays model, or the option will be for you to go back to a manual upload to NYS at the end of the month. You'll still be able to receive your referrals to Pharma Outcomes and complete all your service activity. And what you pay for via provider pays is that transfer of data across to NYS, which I'm sure a lot of us find very useful. So you will be given an option at some point by Pinnacle, but like I say, we don't know when that is going to be, unfortunately. But you will be given plenty of notice by Pinnacle and by your LPCs when that's going to happen. So you've got the choice then to make a decision on what you want to do. And I suspect that the payment structure will be the same as it is currently for CPCS. Next slide, Alison, please. On this slide here, we're not going to play this for you now. There is a video which gives a full demo of Pharma Outcomes for you. So we'll share these slides at the end, and you can access that video and watch it. I think it takes about 10 minutes start to finish, but it goes through all the different stages in detail as a video, and we do recommend that you have a look at that when you get a minute. And the final slide, please, Alison. Yeah, just a few more resources for you here to add to the ones that Alison showed you earlier. So a link to the video, we've got some links to PSNC there and the service spec. We've got the YouTube videos of things that we've already done. I think we've got a few videos on there now, and yeah, the standard treatment program for you as well. I think that covers everything from me tonight, and we've got the Q&A now. So if any of you have got any questions, please either raise your hands and take yourselves off mute, and we'll be happy to chat. Or if you're a bit shy, you don't want to do that, pop it into the chat function in the box on the bottom bar, and we'll be happy to answer questions. Or anything at all? Well, it's gone very quiet, Alison.
It has. It always goes quiet at this point, doesn't it?
You've done a good job, and covered everything that they need to know.
Could I ask Charlotte and Paula a question while other people are thinking about it? So you guys mentioned that obviously some of the oral treatments are not really suitable for a lot of your patients, and it's mainly patches. How do they manage then? Because usually it's a dual therapy, isn't it? Is what's recommended, that you have the patch to cover your low level cravings, and then you have a PRN for when they get an urge to smoke. So how do you find that works in terms of patients quitting if they're not always able to have that PRN type NRT top up?
That's really interesting, Alison. A lot of our chat with them is basically, I do a lot of motivational interviewing, and I know nicotine is, obviously is important to them, but sometimes when we talk to them, that's not always the case, you know what I mean? So it's almost working alongside them to find out. I know that they say that, you could withdraw with nicotine, and they are aware that they could have the both products together. But a lot of ours sometimes don't even need nicotine replacement sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Because we do a lot of motivational interviewing techniques and coaching levels, you know what I mean? But I understand that it is helpful to have nicotine replacement to help with withdrawal. That's absolutely it, you know what I mean? But it's not always the case with our patients, because they've just got a diagnosis of cancer. So they're in a shock, sort of shock mindset at that time. So what we do is we work gently with them at a time and space, give them time to think about it, and a space for them to just sort of see where they're at. Because sometimes when they said, I know I've got to quit, I know I've got to stop, but I always say, but at the end of the day, you've come to me, you've already started the process, let's work at your pace, and let's, you know what I mean? Because it's not always one size fits all. Do you know what I mean? It's them guiding you how they're going to change. You know what I mean? So I understand that obviously the rule is normally both products together, but it's not always the way. It's not, and potentially sometimes it can't always be the way. Particularly with head and neck patients, can you imagine yourself getting up in the morning and your mouth's that sore you can't even brush your teeth? How on earth could we ask them then? Because the idea of head and neck treatment, they've got to keep the mouths clean. So how do we then ask them to potentially, it's almost putting lemon juice on a cut or something, it's almost making it more sore. So using products where they can use it that aren't potentially making the mouth more sore. So it's just finding out with them. It's same with the carbon monoxide. Some people can blow in them, some people can't. Not everything is about NRT sometimes.
No. And we do work a lot with their anxieties because of the fears that they have. It's very different from somebody walking off the street and deciding that they do want to do something about their smoking. This is people who understand or have been told by their physicians that they've got to change. And we use the word change a lot rather than stop, because unless we can put something else in place for them as a coping mechanism, then it's never successful. And over the years, we found that NRT isn't the only thing that they need. As Charlotte's just said, it's about the other support and alternatives to anxiety, because a lot of people, there's a cigarette for every occasion, and often they're the opposites, before you eat and after you eat. And it's just finding other things that they can put into place that takes that particular cigarette out. from their need, and giving them a selection of things that they can choose to do.
Yeah. And where they're at then, what could you do to change, how are you going to change? And then looking at a goal, sort of, you know, what will you need to do that? You know what I mean? Is there a commitment there? You know, it's just really working at their stage, because sometimes when you say to them, you've got to do 2 weeks of this and you're rigid, 4 weeks of this, 6 weeks of that, then they're just not there.
I had somebody the other day, and he smokes 80 cigarettes a day. And he said, I've been smoking for 40 years. How can I possibly change? Because it was, you've got to stop. And he understood why, but he couldn't see an avenue forward to actually start to change at all. And holding it back or saying you can only have this doesn't help him. It's a whole package that we have to offer, because our patients are so different and so variable, but in such a difficult situation. And I think that's it's quite hard sometimes for people to just say, well, you can do it in this particular way, because they've got to cover so many options. Sometimes we see them, as I said, when they've only been diagnosed on the Friday, and we see them on the Monday.
But they teach you how they're going to change. We don't, you know, it depends on that person. Some people like structure to do it that way, but some people, have we really got down at the side of them and said, how are you going to do this? What would you need to plan? You know, and some people like to write it down and look back at how they've done it. You know, to me, everybody has their own way of changing, because if everybody was the same, we're doing 12 weeks of this, 6 weeks of this, 2 weeks of this, then there wouldn't be no one would be smoking. So it's a case of working with your client or your patient and finding out what's right for them, even though I understand the guidance is lozenges with a patch, but that's not the case sometimes with our patients. I hope that's answered it, Alison, in a way.
Yeah, no, it has. Really interested, and thank you very much for the information and the examples. I think it just shows the specific type of patient that you have coming out of the Christie, and one of the reasons why the pharmacist might need to just adapt their consultation style slightly for any patients that you guys refer, compared to perhaps from an acute trust where there might not be the same complexity of the clinical conditions of the patient that's being referred. Thank you.
We'd like nothing less than for them to stop smoking, because we know they're going to come back with a second diagnosis. So, you know, it's especially if they're lung patients and they begin to continue to smoke on radiotherapy, they're going to come back with breast cancer. So we want to get this in there. And that's why it's great working with yourselves to get the message out there, you know, because as well, maybe we could put on the referral extra bits, like they're not able to speak, or, you know, give you notice on, you know, the referral and things like that. Work closely with the pharmacies, which would be great, because this is great, it's on your doorstep, this is where you can go, because your approach might be different to my approach, you know what I mean? So somewhere, and if pharmacists are saying it, doctors are saying it, radiographers are saying it, the Christie's saying it, they'll think, well, why is everyone talking to me about it? There must be some truth in this, you know. And it's almost, the more you say it, making every contact count, the more that person's engaging with you then, isn't it? It's about that, really.
So within the Christie, can I just ask, so somebody gets diagnosis, obviously I presume at that point they've declared that they're a smoker. Do you make contact with every patient, or do patients get given your information to come to you?
Really good question.
How does it work?
That's a really good question, that, Louise. So basically, how we've been running it here for a long time is the patients are asked on the ward, do you want a referral to us? Yeah. And when they come in as an outpatient, they're asked, do you smoke? And then so we're a bit back to front. We get mainly outpatients, and then if they're really poorly, they could become inpatients. Okay, you may have overnighters that are having chemotherapy, but most of our patients are outpatients. So basically, they're asked at the time of the first new appointment, do you smoke? We do have a great service here. They're ex-smokers themselves, so can we refer you into them? And lots of patients say, oh, I know I should, but I don't know, I'm not at that place, but go on, refer me and I'll see how I am. And then when I ring them, they'll say, the doctors have said I should stop smoking, but And it's almost getting down with them and saying, okay, so the doctor's spoken to you about giving up smoking. What are the reasons behind that? So you get them to explore it. It's probably helpful because it's going to be okay. My surgery, you know, because obviously the skin's the biggest organ in your body. So it's going to help with recovery. So it sounds like the doctors mentioned that's going to help with recovery, with, you know, the healing of skin. And they almost say, yeah, and I was against it to start with, but actually it's going to help me. So it's almost, it clicks into the mind. It's their idea of change. And I say, but at the end of the day, the fact you've been referred to us and you picked up the phone, it's great in itself, you know what I mean? And sort of congratulate them that you've already made this choice and said yes to consent, because you may get some patients that say no. And again, that's their choice, isn't it? It's giving people choice, isn't it? We have a service here, great service. Would you like to be referred to them? You know, and this can help with your treatment, because radiotherapy in especially head and neck patient is going to be only 50% effective. So we want these patients are making the effort to come here every day for 6 weeks, maybe on transport, they could live far away. So we want them to get the best out of their treatment, but they've only just been given a cancer diagnosis. So it's almost, they've got to process that they've got that diagnosis, and now they're being asked to stop smoking. So it's almost working, because I know, I've seen it, if they continue to smoke, the treatment is going to be less effective, going to have more side effects. But at the end of the day, I'd love to rescue everybody, but it's got to come from them. I've seen it from the other side, from a smoker when I used to smoke, where patients were struggling. And that's why I chose to do this as a job, because it's getting alongside them, because you know, if they give up smoking, it's going to help them with the health. It's not only, it's going to help them with money, and it's going to help them long term, like the long term plan. You know what I mean? So this is great that we can work in partnerships with yourselves to promote this. But yeah, it's basically choice again. Can we refer you? So we have a service now with the long term plan where they're automatically, because they're already spoken to about very brief advice. Would you like nicotine replacement, and can we refer you? Yes, no. And that's how it's going to work. But it's been the opposite for many years. It's been outpatients.
Yeah, it's just interesting just to try and explore that, isn't it? Because, you know, obviously getting a cancer diagnosis is probably one of the most stressful things you can get. And we always say that trying to quit smoking when you're under extreme stress is probably not the best time. But in this situation, it is, isn't it? It's a bit different. So I think it's as pharmacists getting our heads around that difference. And you've given us some really great tips tonight. And I just wondered if we could maybe get that into a one-pager at some point, Alison, of top tips from the Christie. You know, we've got the recording, haven't we? And just get it down, because I think we are going to have to treat this cohort patients a little bit differently to the way that we used to. So I'll maybe talk to you about that later.
And I agree with that, Louise. It was a really good comment, because at the end of the day, it's the best time to stop. But actually, they can't actually see it in that moment. But giving them a safe space to see, it is the best time, because we don't want to see you here again. But sometimes it can be somebody's own, it's the worst time. We had it when we first started here with the doctors. Oh, this is the worst time. There's, you know, asking them to stop smoking when they first got a diagnosis. But actually, we don't ask them to stop. We look at how they're going to change. They invite us into their home almost. We can see the home with the way they describe when they smoke, which, you know, they sat on a stool in the back. You know, the walls, you don't want the walls looking like this. So it's almost, it's a club, you know, it's them that shows us. We only know our knowledge from the patients for years.
And it's definitely finding alternatives for them to deal, and ways for them to deal with the anxieties that they have, because that's one of the major things that people reach for a cigarette. And exactly, and it's offering them alternatives that they can test out for themselves and say, have a go with this one and just see what you think. This is going to encourage you to breathe more easily, etc., etc. So we go into all these different things that are specific for the individual, because they are all incredibly different. And as you say, the one thing that underlines everybody is nobody wants to be here, nobody wants to have any diagnosis, and nobody wants to have any treatment, really, because it's all the scariest thing. We all know what's going to happen to us, but it's up there in the corner, and the diagnose it brings it right down in their faces, and they can't move around it. They have to do something. And it's no good threatening, oh, well, if you come back, this is what's going to happen. It's about working alongside them to give them an alternative that they can test that works for them.
And we were on the phone, and I'll tell you, just last thing as well, Louise, sorry, just quickly. We were on the phone for 50 minutes the other day to a patient. We were just about to go home. And basically she said, I came to you a year ago and I wasn't in that place to change. But actually I've come a year later and I had a flu attack. And then I realised, and this is my time to change. And then she discovered a family's more important now than that white stick. So it's almost swapping the two. What's more, smoking was important, but actually you're telling me your family's more important now. So it's almost getting them to look at why they want to do this and what's different. And, you know, some people say they've started doing puzzles on the phone. They might have done sewing, you know, brought that back in because of hands about, you know, it's that. It's not always about NRT. That's what I'm saying. It's about
it's just a part of it, isn't it? It's a part of part of the bigger picture.
Process. Yeah,
it's been really helpful. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have got a question here in the chat, Alison, from Haroon. So can you confirm the go live date for the Christie? Do we have an actual go live?
I think we're going to start from next week, are we, ladies? Does that work for you?
So I'm going to speak to you back on that, Alison, just because we're trying to still we've got buy-in to do it, but I'm just working alongside them. So as soon as I'll let you know, I'll email you probably tomorrow, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say sometime in the next couple of weeks, definitely then.
Yeah, and we'll get that information out.
Depends how quick they can do the stuff, because at the moment we've got so much stuff going with the strikes and whatnot and stuff. So
yeah, it's a difficult time, isn't it, in the trust at the moment.
Bear with us with what's going on at the minute, but soon as we'll be back with you, and hopefully it's sooner rather than later, because this is really good. We need to work together on this, because it's great the fact we can do this for our patients. It's wonderful.
Brilliant.
Second part of Haroon's question is, are vapes included on the scheme? So my understanding, Alison, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we can support a patient who's choosing to use vapes, who purchase it themselves. We can support them through their quit, but it isn't a part of the service. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we can provide the behavioural support, but we can't, there's no provision of vape devices or liquids, unfortunately. So if the patient is happy to purchase the vapes themselves, then they can still have behavioural support from the pharmacist throughout their quit attempt, and you can still record the 4 and 12-week quits as part of the service.
Can I just add on that note, Alison, sorry, just to be careful if there's oxygen as well with some of these patients, you know, our patients as well, just to be mindful of what kind of vape they're using, you know, if it's, you know, depending where they've got it from. So it's just to be mindful, really. That's what we talk to them about as well, isn't it?
It's when they're getting something cheaper, and the fact that it looks like it's got a kite mark nowadays with our printing on computers means it doesn't necessarily have one. And there have been some when vapes first came out, there were a lot of problems with people in hospitals too, windows being blown out, and people at home thinking it's all right, or visitors thinking it's all right to smoke because I'm all right, I can do what I want where I want. And they've got people who are on stuff beside the beds, and they go into the room, and of course a lot of it's coming out into the air, and they decided to turn in and switch on to recharge on somebody else's electricity, and that makes a nasty explosion.
So it's just being aware of, and head and neck patients particularly with some kind of vape. We don't, at the end of the day, people have choice and what they choose to do, you know, at the end of the day, but just to be aware of things like that, depending on what treatment they're on and oxygen and all the rest of it, just to be mindful of that.
I was very recently. I was at Stepping Hill very recently, and I was very impressed because the person was trying to change how they smoked and was very unwell, and asked and said, I want that vape thing back, I want to have this, I want whatever. And he was told absolutely no, because he was on oxygen. And I was very impressed because they didn't know what I did, and I happened to be going to the patient totally different for a totally different reason. But it does show that people are becoming much more aware of what's happening. The more people want to use it, the more they have to be aware of what could happen in hospitals or home situations, because somebody else I know had a very near miss because they went to what they thought was an empty house, and it turned out that when they were doing the upstairs, there was an elderly person by herself in bed connected to oxygen with cigarettes beside her bed.
So some patients are not aware of the things that we are aware of. They're not aware of possible things in the background, like cigarettes near oxygen and stuff. So it's having that conversation, because you might see some of our patients that don't realise, that the oxygen with the cigarettes or that it could be potentially. So it's almost finding out the full package. Does that make sense?
Because there is an electrical component, obviously, to recharging them or using them, and people aren't really thinking about that. They're thinking there's no flame, therefore it's totally safe. And electrically, it isn't always totally safe, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. We'll go on. Sorry.
Something else for us to think about, I think, isn't it, that probably haven't considered before. Got another question in chat, Alison. I'll ask you this one. So please clarify 4-week quits. Is it just setting the quit date with the patient, or does the patient have to be free from smoking?
Okay, so good question. So there's a couple of different scenarios. The quit date may well be while the patient is in hospital with Charlotte and Paula in their team. So if they quit smoking whilst they're an inpatient, and then they're discharged and referred to your pharmacy, and they maintain their abstinence before they come to you and you have your registration appointment with them, then the quit date is the date that they quit whilst they were in hospital as an inpatient. And so your 12 weeks works from that quit date. If the patient quit whilst they were in hospital and then maybe fell off the wagon and had a cigarette after they'd been discharged, then when you do that initial registration appointment with them, if they're still motivated to continue their quit attempt, then you can reset a quit date with them at that initial registration appointment. And the 12 weeks then start from that quit date that you've agreed with the patient. But the majority of occasions, I would expect you're going to be receiving a patient from the trust who's already quit. So that quit date will be in the referral notification that you get through Farm Outcomes. The cure team put that quit date into the referral for you so that you've got it. But obviously, it's part of your conversation with the patient in that first appointment as to how they've got on since they've been discharged and have they had any lapses. And if they have, then you would need to reset that quit date.
And then the 4-week quit then would follow 4 weeks of abstinence following on from that quit date, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it may be if somebody's been in hospital for a couple of weeks and then discharged to you and you've done your first appointment, then actually your second session with them might actually fall as the 4-week quit date because they've had 2 weeks in hospital, a week after discharge, and then you've seen them kind of at the end of the 3rd week. It might be the second session that they have with you falls in the 4-week period. So it can happen quite early on in their journey with you within the pharmacy, dependent upon what's happened to them before they've come to you and how long they've been in the hospital.
Brilliant. That's all the questions from the chat. Is there anything else anybody wants to ask? Feel free to come off mute if you've got anything you want to chat to us about or any questions you want to ask. Any of us? And if there's nothing else that you want to talk to us about, do feel free to leave. We're not going to keep you here all night. Appreciate it's been just on an hour now. So, and I expect you all have very busy days in the pharmacy because we know how busy it is at the moment. But any questions, please do ask. But otherwise, feel free to go.
Can I just ask Louise and Alison, could I email you both tomorrow? Is that okay? Regarding where we're up to as well, if that's okay.
Yeah,
and
no problem at all.
Another quick question, Alison. If our patients, we don't need to let you know if they've stopped or whatever, because they might have gone back to smoking. But it's great that you carry on and do 12 weeks because there's only myself and Paula, so we're just doing 1 week, 4 week anyway at the minute. There's not enough staff really, so this is going to be really helpful to us as a service to refer out. What if the person hasn't got in the mind that they're quitting? Can I still refer to you guys, but to have that support as well, or has it got to be a quit person?
You can still refer, I think, if the patient agrees to the referral. So they need to be open to the possibility of quitting, because you've provided them with some support whilst they've been an inpatient. That's one of kind of the referral criteria, that they have to have had some sort of an intervention from you within the trust. It might make it more difficult for the pharmacy team and the pharmacist to then persuade that person, negotiate with them to start their quit attempt. So it's a bit of a balance, isn't it, between catching that patient at the right time and knowing that they are going to be committed to their quit attempts, and losing them and then them starting smoking again. So it's a bit of a difficult one, that one. If you think there's a chance by the time they get the referral through to the pharmacy that the penny will have dropped and they'll be in a place where they're ready to go, then absolutely refer.
Oh, that's great.
We've had this question before, haven't we, to some extent with Bolton, where we were seeing some referrals coming through where the patient hadn't had their initial supply of NRT, so they'd not started the quit, but they'd had that conversation, and we did take it back through PSNC, our negotiator, and then through NHS England, and it was agreed that it was appropriate within the spec to do that. But again, it's probably not the most common way of doing it, and I think certainly it needs to be really clear in the referral notes as to what you want the pharmacy to do. Because we had quite a few puzzled queries, didn't we, early on, Alison, about that particular question, and even PSNC at the time couldn't answer it themselves. They weren't too sure what to do with the query, but we did get clarification that it was fine to do, as long as the patient has got at least motivated to have that first conversation. If they're an absolute no, then I think probably not. But
I know that.
And are willing to accept a referral, that's fine. But you can also, in a lot of areas, we do have locally commissioned pharmacy services as well. So there's always the opportunity to remind patients on discharge from you that, ask your local pharmacy for support later, because we can still do that via different ways in different places. Not everywhere's the same, not everywhere's got a service, but community pharmacy is available to help support patients anyway through quit attempts, so there is still other options out there for them. It's not the end of the road, I suppose, if they say no to you and then a few months down the line decide they want to quit.
Oh, great. So we could almost say there is that service out there when you're ready to make the change, kind of thing. Almost give them signposting. Great.
We can possibly bring do we have a comprehensive list, Alison, of who's got a service and who hasn't? We must have it somewhere.
The GM Making Smoking History Team's website has the best one, because it has a bit of a summary by each locality, depending on which borough in GM that you live in, what the offers are and what the phone numbers are. So that's probably the best place to go for signposting.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. In betweeners, where you really want to catch them, but they're not fully there. That'd be really helpful. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Hope that's been helpful tonight as well.
Yeah, definitely some new stuff, isn't there, Alison? I think is that our third or fourth one of these? I'm not sure.
Really interesting. And
each team's been very, very similar, but your approach is very different, I think, because of the patients you've got. So it's been really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I'll email you both tomorrow, and thank you very much for the invite.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. It's made your day really long. So thanks, ladies. Go home and get some tea now.
Okay. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.